On today's World Insight, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visits Washington, while an American delegation heads to the Xiangshan Forum. Can these exchanges repair China-U.S. ties?
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is visiting the United States this week at the invitation of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. According to China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the visit will cover bilateral ties and issues of international concern. The visit coincides with California Governor Gavin Newsom's tour to China. It is also coming at a time 3 weeks ahead of the Asia-Pacific Economic Leaders meeting in San Francisco. So what can we expect from the trip? For more, let's loop in our panelists. In Los Angeles, I'm joined by Douglas Paul, Distinguished Fellow of the Asia Program of Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. In Washington, D.C., Surabh Gupta, Senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist from the Institute for China-American Studies. And last but not least, in Shanghai, Professor Shending Li from the Institute of International Studies with Fudan University. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to see all of you. So, we have seen the warming up of people-to-people interactions between China and the U.S., particularly with the ongoing visit by California Governor to China. Now, Mr. Paul, now we hear the good news of Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi visit to the U.S., going to be received by his American counterpart. So how do you see different levels of interactions at this moment?
Institutions have begun to resume the kinds of contacts they've had in the past. In a few days, we'll have the Xiangshan Forum, which is between the militaries that China has relations with and the United States that will have some participation as well. So I think this is a generally improving atmosphere, reflecting change in China, not so much change elsewhere.
Yes, I agree with Doug. People to people, official to official contacts are resuming very rapidly from China to U.S. and from U.S. to China. And China will soon have a new defense minister who is to go to welcome all participants, including from America, to come to Beijing to discuss international defense cooperation. So we are going to see a more active and more deepened international engagement.
If I may add one more facet, and that facet is, I think at the American end, the feeling is that much of what they wanted to get done vis-a-vis China in terms of competing with China, that has been done. You know, the National Security Advisor talked of building situations of strength by building a lattice work of alliances and partnerships around China to shape the environment. The United States has also, I mean, there have been a lot of industrial policy actions, and of course, as we know, technology controls, export controls. So the US, this administration feels that it has done most of what it wanted to do with China. A lot of that was disruptive, of course, so it now wants to stabilize the relationship with China, and it is committed to that structural stabilization of relationship, although I would suggest that it's not at a threshold as high as we would prefer it to be, but the administration is out to stabilize the relationship.
Interesting. Mr. Paul, you want to respond to that?
No, I think he's essentially said it correctly. This upcoming visit, for which Wang Yi will be preparing for President Xi's attending the APEC Leaders Forum, reflects a strengthening of the U.S. position and a greater sense of self-confidence by the U.S. with rebuilding alliances and doing some reforms at home. If the visit were not to take place, if Xi Jinping were not to come to the U.S. would still feel it was a success because he would have come under terms where the U.S. had resumed a position of strength, something that was discussed early on controversially in Anchorage between Yang Jiechi, Wang Li, Jake Sullivan, and Secretary Blinken.
Professor Shen, what about from the Chinese side, looking at the realities today, we have seen increasing call upon actions together on climate change. Meanwhile, we also see conflicts going on, particularly the ongoing one in the Middle East that is extremely worrisome. Now, I know China has also been trying to play a constructive role in the process. So how do you see the timing of this increasing interaction besides just bilateral relations?
A lot of issues to be discussed between China and the U.S. On the positive side, the two countries need to increase government-to-government contacts, especially after establishing China-U.S. Economic Working Group. And also, as you mentioned, climate change, and also increasing amount of regional tension in Europe. How China-U.S. and various other stakeholders could work together to stabilize the situation in Ukraine. And how with the just emerged Middle East new emergency, and China-U.S. and other stakeholders would work under the UN framework to help ease the tension, to help stabilize the situation in Gaza area, to comfort Israel, and also to help the miserable people living in that part of Gaza. So China-U.S. need to meet, discuss, working together, and donate our resource to propose mutually acceptable, decent proposal to help both Palestine, Hamas, and Israel. And China needs the U.S. to be very serious in handling the Taiwan issues, facing the upcoming Taiwan election. So U.S. can do a lot to assure China U.S. is a responsible country, and China would also contribute for its best what it can do.
Mr. Gupta?
There's much to discuss between the two sides, but I want to bring focus on the APEC platform, which is very, very important because, as the two sides have been competing in Asia from an economic perspective, they've essentially, the decoupling has happened. And right now, there are very few institutional frameworks. There are not that many institutional frameworks in which they communicate together. APEC is one platform for trade and economics where they do communicate are on the same platform and communicate with each other. And this creates a basis for more deepened conversations. Yes, they do meet at the G20, but as we know, with regard to IPEF and some of the various initiatives that the US has put out, critical minerals partnership, et cetera, much of that is to decouple from China or de-risk from China economically and from a trade perspective. So the APEC platform becomes important for the two to meet together and hoping to deepen ties within that. But beyond that platform too, I would say that there are areas that there are deliverables that they can harvest at this very meeting going forward. I think they're talking in terms of initiating a 1.5 track on AI, artificial intelligence, in areas such as areas where AI will not be allowed to manage decision making, say nuclear command and control. I think both sides can agree on that. Another area which can be harvested quickly, I think the time has come to restart conversations, communications at the senior level. And I'm hoping that the two sides, from a bilateral perspective, will really give a push to get their science and technology agreement, the very first agreement after normalization in 1979, permanently renewed or renewed for the next term. And that it's not going to happen at this meeting because there's a lot of issues to thrash out. But I hope the two presidents can really put impetus and their capital behind getting that agreement done.
Mr. Paul, you see the two gentlemen already given out a very long laundry list of their own for the discussion. Obviously, we are looking at a very short timeline leading up to APEC. Meanwhile, right after APEC, the U.S. is going to entering its election year. So this window opportunity could be quite short. What can be done during this window opportunity if there is commitment?
Well, I think it's not likely to be very much in in reality, but I think it's worth being ambitious. Let's take the worst crisis right now, which is the Gaza crisis with Israel. China has been seeking to exploit opportunities to separate itself from the U.S. The U.S. has been dragged into a conflict it's not comfortable with. Both the U.S. and China need to be more ambitious in their goals to prevent the conflict from spreading in the Middle East. Both of us depend directly or indirectly on the Middle Eastern energy supplies. It's not in the interest of China or the U.S. to have those interrupted. This would be a good time for China to exercise more of its influence on Iran, having delivered on the Iranian-Saudi normalization recently. China could show a positive hand in helping to sustain a calm, nonviolent Middle East as we get through this current crisis.
We have seen increasing people-to-people interactions also with the ongoing California governor's visit to China. We have seen, warming up of the Chinese public's response about a country called the United States of America, and about, what people can be doing together when they are together. So, Professor Shen, how much do you see the public sentiment could be having opportunities to change for the better, to warm up the already very much icy relations?
Well, I think for what I know, the Chinese side, majority of people may think it's great to increase the weekly two-way commercial flights from 4 to 10 to 24, now to 40. And that's not enough. We need to increase these to hundreds to return to the older normal before COVID. And with that, more Chinese can reduce their cost to travel to U.S., to study, to do business, to invest. And we welcome U.S. visitors, more governors, more students to return. And now, such a kind of bilateral flow of people have been very limited, going to increase. With more interaction, and Chinese view toward the U.S. might be more balanced. And we also know there are many other America, say, may have some view which is not that positive on China. And some may find their reason, and some may be ungrounded. We would welcome America to return, to study, to invest, to help us for our chip-making business. And also, we should assure them we're not going to use this American originated high technology to be used against America. So our president and the U.S. we need to talk, to assure each other, and probably to verify, to make others to believe you are not lying. With increased interaction and cooperation, I think more and more mutual suspicion might be reduced.
Mr. Gupta, decoupling seems to be a phrase now decreasingly favored by the general public, even apparently in the United States when it comes to decoupling with China. What would be the adjective to characterize the appropriate proportion of interactions between China and the United States? How much do you see that discussion is taking place in the U.S.? How do you see political events in the U.S. might have an impact or not on this discussion?
The U.S. has been trying to walk back a little from that decoupling talk and start calling it de-risking. The Europeans invented that term, and to be frank, the Europeans have actually implemented that honestly. I think they're moving out in terms of trying to de-risk the China relationship to the extent that there's not excess dependence in particular sectors on China. I'm skeptical that that's what the US really wants. It says it wants de-risking, but my sense is that the political sentiment in Washington is geared much more towards decoupling, selective decoupling in sectors, not across the board, but decouple. And for me, the Biden administration, to its credit, has tried to get ahead of this to some extent after taking very significant measures, of course, against China. In terms of trying to preserve that small yard high fence framework that it has. That framework, frankly, is a bit beginning to expand, even though it doesn't want it to, as we've seen in the recent supplement to the export controls it just put out last week. But the Biden administration, that having been said, would like to try to maintain a certain degree of sanity and control over the relationship. I doubt whether that is going to really take place. The Republicans have very strong views on this. And even if the Biden administration is to an extent successful in that regard, think of the sectors that it has listed out for decoupling. It talks in terms of quantum, it talks in terms of AI, and of course, chips. Quantum, AI, these are all the sectors of the future. So the progression of the relationship would be one towards drifting apart than coming together. I am skeptical, frankly, in this regard, and I don't think things are moving in a good direction. And frankly, there is a real buildup of steam on Capitol Hill to actually take it right to the edge of the precipice in terms of decoupling the relationship. So not many happy things to say, frankly, in this regard.
How do you see the roles of different players, Mr. Paul, in the discussion of China-U.S. relations, particularly looking at the future and potential of this bilateral relations?
Well, it's a complicated picture. I think Professor Shun made a very important point about resuming people-to-people ties. There's a natural attraction between the people of China, the United States, and other countries. They don't want to be in confrontation as a natural state. They'd like to exploit opportunities to change that. But over against that, political forces are, as Mr. Gupta has been saying, pushing in the opposite direction. We've had a visit to China by Governor Newsom of California. He stands out in contrast with the governors in Michigan or Virginia or North Carolina, Arizona, Florida, who have been trying to draw lines that keep China out. I think that that's an encouraging sign where it reinforces the message that Professor Shun had, which is we do need more people-to-people ties to work against the strong pressure to kind of recreate the Cold War between the United States and China.
Meanwhile, how does that work inside China, Professor Shun? As we know that there are some promising signs. For example, on Tuesday, Lenovo, a company that has been bringing the best of China and the U.S. together for quite some time, had a grand event in the U.S. inviting the U.S. Partners, including some of the major chip makers, to be on the same stage for AI's future, the discussion about that. That is only one of those many examples, in fact, in terms of business synergy taking place between the two countries. But now, how do you see different players, their input in this discussion in China as well, about what's next with the U.S., with the fact that both of the other two gentlemen have illustrated very clearly about the still worrisome decoupling trends, in particularly some of the key and critical areas?
2 days ago, White House has announced its final decision to restrict U.S. high technology, especially those artificial intelligence, etc., to transfer from the U.S. to China. But meantime, I noticed that the U.S. has relaxed some of its control announced last year to some extent. For instance, to remove those potential control risk restriction over South Korean chip-making business and Taiwan origin chip-making investment in mainland. In the past year, U.S. would extend waiver to them year by year, but this time indefinitely. No more control. They can increase their investment in China. This is good. U.S. has realized the more restriction imposed on China, the more likely that while China would suffer in short term, but in medium and long term, China would generate its own original innovative technology, and then compete with U.S. More strongly. How to handle China's ever-increasing technological innovation through restriction and through cooperation. U.S. is trying to create a more complicated, nuanced combination. I think this is some new phenomenon. And President Xi Jinping mentioned 2 weeks ago when he received the visiting U.S. Senator Majority Leader, and he said he renewed his decade-long argument. There is 1,000 reasons to improve U.S.-China relations, and there is no single reason to be harmful to such a relationship. If both countries would commit to this righteous political belief and also would implement in their best heart of such a cooperation, I think we still have good hope to ever improve good relationship, and also to reduce those kind of industry resilience, the de-risking, etc.
Okay. Now, from now until November, the APEC economic leaders meeting, very limited time, only a few weeks to go. So during this critical prep time, what needs to be done? What kinds of atmosphere needs to be there to make sure when there is, and if there were an interaction bilaterally between the two presidents, that things can be on track and bring more potentials for the future despite all of the challenges all of you mentioned. Mr. Gupta.
I think the two sides have been handling this fairly astutely for the last couple of months, frankly, ever since Secretary Blinken went across, was it in June? And then, of course, we had Treasury Secretary, Commerce Secretary, we had Mr. Kerry come across. They've handled this well. You know, President Xi has written letters to American citizens. This is typically well choreographed, and I think when Mr. Wang Yi then met Mr. Sullivan in Malta, the little incremental steps along the way have been taken, and there isn't as yet, I see, any deal breaker per se. So both sides have communicated to each other that what the do's and don'ts. I think they're both sticking within their lanes, and I think that's all a very good sign that they will move. Of course, we don't need something like a balloon incident or something like that, something which we cannot foresee pop up and that can just scupper matters. But I think the two sides deserve credit for getting process right. And what they need to now do is to deliver a product, frankly. And we're not so sure whether they can in San Francisco.
Professor Shen.
I think the two countries have already turned the tide around with so many U.S. high-level secretaries coming to China and Chinese senior leader visiting U.S. or meeting in Malta, etc. The two countries are well in a mood and in the process to make the next round of summit between the two presidents face to face to happen, to prepare for a better short-term relationship for next year. U.S. needs to respond to China on the single most sensitive issue, Taiwan, to be firm, not to support Taiwan independence.
Mr. Paul?
Well, I think Mr. Gupta and Professor Shen have said it well. Economically, I think we need to get a basis going for more reasonable, fact-based cooperation. And their Secretary Yellen, He Fang from the Chinese side, and Secretary Raimondo have they reflect business and financial interests very well. And I think they will bring some realism to the economic interactions. The U.S., since the Malta and Vienna meetings between the national security leaders, has been more disciplined on the question of Taiwan. And China has been more careful about its rhetoric on sensitive security issues. And we need to see that continue and see if we can push the agenda a little farther to find areas where we can actually agree that there is going to be no competition or we can actually cooperate. So I think it's moving in the right direction, but I don't want to be overly optimistic.
Thank you for all of you for your wonderful input. Douglas Paul, Shanding Li, and Surab Gupta. Really appreciate it. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us. Bye for now.